What do you think of when I say Resident Evil? Do the live action or CGI movies come to mind? Maybe Ethan Winters comes to mind. You may find yourself reminiscing about playing Resident Evil 4 or 5 with a friend. There may even be a spin-off game, novel, or manga as well that comes to mind. I bring all of this up to say that Resident Evil is a very large brand. This legendary long-running IP has grossed hundreds of millions of dollars across different mediums and means a lot to different people, and like many other long-running franchises, evolution was critical for it to stay relevant. The original game, released in '96, is remembered for pioneering the survival horror genre, the sequel for introducing new characters, expanding on the world, and refining the gameplay, the third for item crafting, dodging attacks, nemesis of course, and narrative decisions, while the fourth is remembered for revolutionizing the third-person camera, quick-time events, new level designs, and is ultimately remembered as one of the most influential games of all time. However, to me at least, the original remake of the first Resident Evil holds a very special place in my heart. Being born in '96 and not gaming until the early 2000s, I never played the original on the PS1. I also didn't engage in anything horror because I was terrified. The dark, monsters, clowns, and you name it probably terrified little me. My aunt probably didn't help showing 9-year-old me The Descent. As a result, I steered very clear of anything horror until around 2017. As I was getting older and more into film, one of my good friends introduced me to a little movie called Alien. This film is deserving of an essay itself, but I'll keep this short in the interest of time. Horror, to ignorant me, was jump scares, gore, and monsters. I believe this because Slenderman, Outlast, and Five Nights at Freddy's were the big horror games when I was a teen. The reason I brought these games up was because Alien was none of that. Alien was quiet, well-written, and was a master of constructing mysterious, tense atmospheres, allowing our minds to wonder what could be behind each corner. After accepting the fear of the unknown and being unsure of what comes next, viewers shift their minds towards appreciating the feelings of dread and suspense. After becoming a fan of the series and thinking I was into horror, I bought Alien Isolation, The Evil Within, and the Resident Evil Origins bundle. And while Alien Isolation didn't necessarily scare me, it successfully built a thick layer of stressful tension through its excellent use of audio, environments, and constantly being stalked. Beating this game felt like jumping over a hurdle. It allowed me to finally appreciate horror as a genre, and with Alien Isolation behind me, I finally built up the courage to play Resident Evil 0. I'm assuming if you're a Resident Evil fan, you probably clicked on this video, and I appreciate you being here. So let's not sugarcoat anything. 0 is an awful place to begin. I did it since it was marketed as the prequel to the original. Anyways, the tank controls threw me off. I was tired of lugging my items everywhere, and I got lost a lot. I remember putting the game down, telling an old friend who was a big fan of the series I started with 0, and him laughing at me, telling me to start with the original. Traumatized, I said no, and more than likely went back to playing fighting games. One day, however, I was going through my backlog, saw the original, and said why not, since I didn't give it a chance back in the day. And after getting used to tank controls, fixed camera angles, and dying a lot, the game finally clicked, and I realized that this game was something very special. Before diving into the production history and the game's mechanics, Resident Evil 1 Remake is one of the most analyzed and talked about games on this platform. You have more than likely seen one of the hundreds of developer diaries, video analysis, reviews, or probably something about this game. Because of this, and with respect for everyone's time, I will briefly discuss the original and the production team's goals for the remake. With that preamble out of the way, let's finally get into where it all started. The original Resident Evil, or Biohazard in Japan, is the game remembered for many things. My understanding is that it's highly regarded for pioneering the survival horror genre, engrossing mansion design, high-risk reward gameplay, focus on resource management, as well as introducing the world to a charming cast of characters. The game sold well enough to greenlight a sequel, and we all know where the story goes from there. Between the releases of Resident Evil 1 to 3, legendary director Shinji Mikami feared that the game had already aged terribly and wanted to take another pass at bringing his vision to life through utilizing the GameCube's new hardware. While always envisioning Resident Evil as the remake in his mind, the PS1's hardware limitations forced Mikami and the team to make concessions in pursuit of their image, and their dreams would come true after receiving the green light from Capcom to start production of the remake. Leveraging the GameCube's hardware and listening to criticism about the original, Mikami and team created a masterclass in horror atmosphere, cinematic fixed camera angles, superb voice acting, at least compared to the original, introduced new challenges for returning players, and successfully modernized the original for a new audience. With this finally out of the way, let's dive into what makes Remake a pillar in the survival horror genre. Before starting the game, players can choose between Chris Redfield or Jill Valentine. While they progress through the same stages, they both have different supporting casts, endings, and subtle gameplay differences. After selecting your character, a brief cinematic plays explaining that you're part of STARS, an elite police task force unit burdened with investigating the mysterious disappearance of the Bravo team north of Raccoon City. As the team investigates the helicopter crash, a pack of ravaged dogs attack. Joseph gets torn apart, Jill freezes in fear as Chris saves her, and Brad, the helicopter pilot, escapes as the team runs towards the mansion mansion for safety. After investigating a gunshot you hear in the west wing of the mansion, you return to the lobby as everyone is mysteriously gone. From here, the game largely focuses on you exploring the mansion for the remaining members of STARS. While the opening and events leading players to the mansion are static, decisions players make throughout the narrative are anything but. Players are provided with choices throughout the game varying based on the character. Decisions like whether to heal someone, saving characters' lives, fighting beside someone, and more are present here. These decisions can have ramifications on characters' fates, services they can provide, and which of the several endings you'll receive. These decisions, endings, weapons, and more also help with the game's replay value, which we'll discuss in more detail later. Now, reflecting on where the series goes narratively, this story feels charming, quaint, and self-contained. I can't help but to enjoy the simple story of you're investigating the disappearance of the Bravo team throughout the mansion while slowly unraveling a conspiracy. It's a no-nonsense, straightforward narrative that resonated well with many and introduced a universe lending itself to being developed. Another charming aspect of Remake are its graphics and overall presentation. If I were to ask you what Grand Theft Auto Vice City, the original Splinter Cell, Warcraft 3, Battlefield 1942, The Elder Scrolls Morrowind, and Resident Evil Remake had in common, what would you say? If you called them classics, you wouldn't be wrong, but all of these games were released in 2002. The reason I bring these games up are to level set the AAA graphical expectations for games 20 years ago. Of the games listed, Remake, graphically speaking, holds up the best as it looks generations ahead of its time and still looks great today. Remake's graphical fidelity is a byproduct of having pre-rendered images operate as the backgrounds while the GameCube's resources focused on character models instead. This allowed character models to have a lot of detail by 2002 gaming standards, and they still look great 20 years later. What doesn't look great 20 years later are the HD remasters backgrounds and the CGI. The backgrounds look probably better on CRTs, I'm assuming, but didn't survive the upscaling process to higher resolutions, obviously. The CGI cutscenes are a bit of a mixed bag as well. CGI cutscenes always run the risk of aging badly as developers are using technology at the time to create them. While some age better than others, everyone runs this risk. I prefer cutscenes being rendered in the game's engine as they tend to age better with upscaled resolutions and cleaned up visuals. But I also don't know a whole lot about game design. I say this since there's clearly a reason that studios are using these cutscenes. Remake, in this scenario, receives all of this criticism with an asterisk. The CGI cutscenes, like I said earlier, are a mixed bag. I think the opening camp footage and endings have aged very well, while scenes like the courtyard water draining, hunter chase sequence, and the fountain draining scene have not aged the best. With that said, this feels more like a nitpick than anything. Some things that I can nitpick are the game's atmosphere and overall tone. So, let's begin by addressing the elephant in the room, the fixed camera angles. For anyone unfamiliar, fixed camera angles were something that developers used back in the day to save on hardware resources. 3D movement at the time and 3D cameras weren't common until Crash Bandicoot and Mario 64 solidified 3D movement. Although fixed camera angles and tank controls were going out of style by 2002, Mikami and team left their mark on the fixed camera era by leveraging them to create highly cinematic scenes, synergizing well with the overall gameplay and tank control nature of Remake. Mikami and team's choice of camera angles acts beyond the bounds of traditional video games. Each camera angle was meticulously chosen to make you feel claustrophobic, uneasy about what you can't see, deliberately hide things, and allows players' imaginations to wonder what's behind each corner. This camera's perspective can feel like you're navigating through a movie or being watched, which, feels cinematic. Just like in horror movies, the angle allows the team to control how much information players can gather. It also prevents players from using the camera to peek around corners like in most stealth games. This can lead to players jumping at enemies that they may not have seen as a result. While visuals are important, of course, audio and other ancillary effects are critical pieces of constructing Remake's legendary atmosphere. Before I keep going, I'd like to remind everyone that if you're enjoying this essay, a subscription and a like would go a far way in helping the channel grow. Thanks for your support, and back to the video. As players progress through the game, they'll realize that there are shadows of zombies tapping on windows, fake window breaking, ambient noises throughout the mansion, and the cold sound of your footsteps. These smaller ancillary effects help enhance the overall tone of the game, making exploration tense and stressful. Speaking of exploration, I believe now would be as good a time as any to talk about what makes Resident Evil special, which is of course the gameplay. During the story overview, I pointed out how the game will have you pick between Chris and Joe. In addition to the differences listed earlier, there are some gameplay differences as well. They both have access to different defensive items, weapons, lockpicking instruments, health pools, and most importantly, inventories. The community seems to prefer playing as Jill because of her lockpick, early access to the shotgun, her larger inventory, and that's it. Can't imagine anything else. Chris, on the other hand, has more health, access to his lighter, better defensive items, and a higher headshot percentage. I, stupidly, picked Chris because his voice acting is hilarious and he doesn't feel as fragile as Jill. And for the people in the comments, yes, Jill is better, thanks for the hot take. After picking your character and getting out of the intro, younger players may be thrown off with how the game controls. Tank controls will most likely throw off younger players since the era of fixed camera angles and tank controls has ended. Combine this with the adoption of 3D movement with over-the-shoulder cameras, and Remake can feel a bit dated by modern standards. If this is your introduction to tank controls, it's worth remembering that combat and exploration are designed to be slow. Zombies and even the first boss will slowly approach you. This is designed so players have ample time to plant their feet and defend themselves. The other critical piece to acknowledge is that forward on the controller is always forward regardless of the camera's position. Your controls do not change when a camera angle changes. Sure, the controls will take some time to get used to, but after realizing how well they synergize with the camera's angles and the pace of the enemies, Remake feels like the apex of classic Resident Evil. And if you can't get used to these controls, you can always switch to alternate, and I'll let the footage speak for itself here. Once the players feel comfortable with the controls, the gameplay is fairly straightforward. The players will run around their environments pointing their guns, shooting at enemies, healing with herbs and cans, use defensive items to break free from enemies grabbing you, and wiggle their analog stick left and right while mashing the action button to mitigate how much damage they take. While all of this is pretty standard, what happens when you inevitably need to pick up an item? Well, now we're finally playing Resident Evil. One of the underlying design philosophies that make Resident Evil's gameplay so engaging, especially on your first run, are the mental gymnastics players go through when encountering new items. In case you've been listening to the video instead of watching it, Chris can only carry 6 items and Jill can only carry 8. Between the essentials of your gun, ammo, healing, and probably a quest item, you're only left with 2 slots, which isn't enough to pick up potential healing items, ammo, and that quest item you might have just stumbled across. While you can switch to Jill to mitigate some of these problems, between ink ribbons, multiple quest items, new weapons, current weapons, different ammo types, a flask, your lighter, and everything else you find while fighting for your life, yeah, I think your hands will be full. The challenging decisions players face on their first run defines what makes survival horror special. Players run through several hypothetical scenarios of what they do if they get into a fight, methods of healing, planning for what's behind doors of keys that they find, what happens if they stumble across an item, potentially new enemies, and how badly they need an item before picking it up. Thinking about this in parallel with puzzles presented throughout the game, traversing through stressful environments, the finite ink ribbons, limited ammo, and the dynamic environments make the exploration and progression through the game legitimately stressful. On the topic of dynamic environments, let's discuss why the level design found throughout the entire game is sublime. Before discussing the mansion and the overall level design, I'd like to preface this section with this. The mansion's level design is deep and very complex. This mansion, quite frankly, deserves an entire video of its own to fully appreciate its intricate design. As such, I will discuss the high-level elements and a few very specific examples outlining why this place is so special. The highest praise I can give the Spencer Mansion is by calling it the gold standard of survival horror level design. When thinking about the mansion's enemy placements to save room locations, shortcuts, item placements, the looping level design, the mansion's dynamic nature, players' ability to create safe routes, and the unnerving atmosphere work in harmony to create one of the most engaging levels in gaming. Enemy placements are deliberately challenging as they're typically around healing items, keys, objectives, save rooms, unlockable doors, and other key locations. Since players are forced to encounter enemies on their way to save rooms, they're presented with the decision of burning through precious resources or potentially taking a few bites to create a safe path. The other layer of complexity comes with exploring. What if you're out of bullets? What if you don't have any more ink ribbons? What if you're out of healing? All of these questions will constantly be racing through players' mind as they solidify a path forward. The high-risk mansion exploration harmonizes well with the enemy placements, proportionally scarce save rooms, and the terror of what hides behind each fixed camera angle. Nevertheless, you will progress and stumble upon doors you haven't come across, which leads to the next topic of shortcuts. I distinctly remember my first time playing and being frustrated at all the locked from the other side doors. After fighting my fears and finally exploring, I remember stumbling upon the second floor of the West Mansion, grabbing an arrow, unlocking the door, and appearing on the second floor of the dining hall. The mansion is full of this interconnected design philosophy that rewards player exploration with new routes. This design can also be found by the elevator in the courtyard and when you connect the waterfall tunnel to the cabin with the crank in it. The mansion has more of this looping level design as you progress through the game, but my favorite part of the mansion is how dynamic it feels when you return with the helmet key. When you step foot in the mansion, a CGI cutscene of a hunter is shown with them quickly approaching. After disposing of it, you'll immediately realize that there are hunters all over the mansion. These hunters are faster, hit harder than the zombies that you've been fighting, have more health, and can break through things. While this may sound punishing with the finite amount of saves and ammo provided throughout the game, hunters successfully introduce a new, more difficult and durable enemy while also redefining the map that you've grown so accustomed to. Zombies, your first enemy, will groan, slowly approach you, and inflict a bit of damage. Spiders are faster and can poison you, and hunters are faster, hit harder, and largely contribute to the mansion feeling dynamic. So, earlier I said that players will use resources to create safe routes back to save rooms. Players will do this after they're comfortable with the mansion's overall design and realize where they do and where they don't want to go. Some players may even find solace at doors since they momentarily remove you from Remake's oppressive atmosphere. Now, with that said, it's absolutely horrifying when a hunter breaks down a door and starts running at you. Doors abruptly opening you thought were safe is a great way to subvert player expectations while also breathing new life throughout the entire mansion. I know this is a very subtle thing, but I really believe it's one of the best things that the mansion is going for. And as much praise as I have for how well the mansion blends all the aspects of the game, there's an elephant in the room, which is of course the rest of the game. A common piece of criticism I hear people bring up is that the game falls off after the mansion. After beating the game around 8, 10, or however many times, honestly I can't entirely remember, I think I'm going to have to respectfully disagree. The areas outside of the mansion explore different gameplay or narrative elements to keep the game feeling fresh. Calling the other areas bad because they're simply not the mansion is a bad piece of criticism in my opinion. The cabin is hidden behind a graveyard, forces you through an ominous forest, has a key item, and formally introduces you to Lisa Trevor. The courtyard is where you can change the water level to access the residence and the tunnel under the waterfall linking to the Trevor cabin. The residence finds you backtracking with keys and items while foreshadowing Plant 42's existence with journals and excellent environmental storytelling. Listen, I agree these levels lack the mansion's interconnectivity and require a lot of backtracking to progress, but I also believe that they successfully stand on their own as well. They accomplish what they set out to achieve and introduce a variety of new ideas not found in the mansion. The other thing these areas have going for them is that they don't have to make logical sense. As much as I enjoy Dark Souls Lordran and Metroidvanias, their maps must logically make sense in order to function. This prevents developers from adding random doors to caves and secret passages abruptly. Everything must make sense to sustain the overall cohesive logic. When levels aren't forced to conform to these standards, developers can introduce a variety of new level designs to keep the game fresh and keep players wondering what's behind each corner. I know that a lot of people will disagree with me here, but I sincerely believe that variety is the spice of life, and the game may run the risk of being exhausting if it took place entirely in the mansion. All of that said, I still have fun going through this game 90 hours later, and speaking of 90 hours, now will be an excellent time to segue into the replay value of the game. Resident Evil games are known for being short, but they're also known for having cool rewards for beating the game under certain circumstances. Completing the game unlocks rewards, weapons, costumes, different endings, additional modes, and more as a reward for players replaying the game. This old school game design can still be felt in the more modern Resident Evil releases. This game even gives you a completion time and rewards for beating the game faster and faster. While this wasn't unique at the time, all of this additional content will continue aging like wine as the industry continues pushing microtransactions, DLCs, and battle passes in our single player games. When fans of a franchise hear the word remake, their eyes probably roll or they get frustrated. Most remakes either sacrifice the tone of the original, make concessions to accomplish other design initiatives, or blatantly disrespect the original. The Resident Evil 1 remake is a rare example of a remake becoming the definitive version of a game. This game enhances a classic that pioneered the survival horror genre and serves as the blueprint for the remake of Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 7 and 8 to an extent. Furthermore, this game, while not featuring a first-person camera, has an overall tone and atmosphere the rest of the series hasn't been able to match. And as much as I enjoyed the design evolution of 4, the return to form of 7, and the remake of 2, remake, for me at least, will always be my favorite. Alright, so quick outro time. So as you guys can probably tell, throughout this video I've been kind of experimenting with different mics. I think the mic that I'm using right now I'm satisfied with. I'm probably going to play around with it and equalize it a little bit, but I think I'm finally starting to get to that tone that I've been wanting to get to for a while now, so that's exciting. But most importantly, guys, thank you so much for all the support on the previous video. Channel coming out of nowhere getting 700 views isn't nothing, and especially with how much people really enjoyed it. That's great to hear, and obviously I'll keep on doing these videos as long as, you know, I have the time and energy and passion, because right now this channel is more so just driven on like passion and stuff that I actually really want to talk about and discuss. So really not sure what else is in the future down the pipeline for the channel, but yeah, if you guys want to subscribe, I'd be like really appreciative. And I'm not sure if you know, enjoy my commentary or my perspective on any of these games, but feel free to subscribe. And I'll probably have more video essays, more discussions, and other stuff in the future, because something that I really don't want to do is just have a channel that's focused on like one thing, right? Like I don't want to be just come here for like, you know, Resident Evil, come here for SMT, or come here for whatever else I want to cover. I just want to have like a more general gaming channel to just discuss my passions and hobbies and stuff like that. So with that out of the way, that's all I had. Once again, guys, thank you so much for all the support on the last video. I know that this is like a cliche that like YouTubers always do, but I guess when you're actually like in the driver's seat and you're like experiencing all this stuff for the first time, it's like, oh my God, like, wow, this video is actually doing pretty well, especially from like, you know, like I said, a channel that nobody's heard of and on a game that's like 20 years old. So anyways, thanks again, guys, and I'll check in with you later. So last minute addition, as I was editing the video, I realized that I didn't ask you guys what was your favorite Resident Evil game. Like, how did you get into the franchise? Are you a fan of maybe the movies? Which is your favorite game? I'd love to keep the conversation going with you guys in the comments below. Feel free to obviously follow me on like Twitter, and then if you subscribe, keep an eye on the community tab, as that's where I'll have like video updates and like stuff that I'm working on. So that's it. And again, thanks for everything, guys. Bye.